Today we begin Part 3, or Section 3, of the book, The Rape of the Mind, by Juste A.M. Merleau. And it also begins with Chapter 10. Part 3, Unobtrusive Coercion. In the course of our investigations concerning thought control, menticide, and brainwashing, it has become clearer that more attention must be given to the means by which inner preparedness for mental submission is brought about. Unobtrusively, personal development and various cultural influences can make man more vulnerable to suggestion and ideological attack. In Part 3, I call to the reader's attention the creeping intrusion into our minds by technology and bureaucracy, and how special forms of prejudice and mass delusion can take possession of our minds before we are aware of it. The final chapter, an inquiry on treason and loyalty, again calls to our attention the tremendous influence of mass thinking on our personal concepts of loyalty. Chapter 10. The child is father to the man. The time has come to ask ourselves if it is possible that there is something in our own growth and development that may make us more vulnerable to mental intrusion and ultimate brainwashing. Are there, for instance, special coercive needs in us? What is communicated and taught to the child that may keep him a spiritual prisoner of his environment? These are important questions and would require a thorough philosophic and pedagogic investigation. Nevertheless, for practical purposes, we may limit our attention to two different spheres of development: the influence of parents and the influence of certain social habits. The latter has already been investigated in the second part of this book. Indeed, I must repeat that in my experience all those who are educated under rules of too strict obedience and conformity break down more easily under pressure. During World War II, when the so-called tough SS officers were interrogated after they had become prisoners, they readily surrendered their military secrets. Having lived for years under totalitarian command, they were just as obedient to the new commanding voices. Sometimes we only had to imitate the shouting voices of their masters, and they would exchange their former boss for the new one. For them, every command had become the automatic trigger for new conforming obedience. In dealing with members of the Communist Party in this country, we had a comparable experience. The members were politically submissive and changed their obstructive party strategy to an opposite set of tactics the moment Moscow ordered them to do so. How some totalitarians may develop. Increasing attention has been given to the various psychological motivations leading to political extremism and a totalitarian mentality in men and women who have been brought up in a democratic atmosphere, but who have voluntarily chosen to associate themselves with some totalitarian ideology. Psychologists who have come into contact with the totalitarian attitude and have studied those who are easily influenced by it agree, by and large, that in the free democratic countries the option for totalitarianism is nearly always determined by an inner personality factor, frustration, if you will. It is usually neither poverty nor social idealism that makes a man a totalitarian, but mostly internal factors such as extreme submissiveness and masochism on the one hand, or lust for power on the other. Unsolved sibling rivalry plays a role too. I have treated several Nazi collaborators whose political behavior was motivated to some extent by the fact that they were older sons and could not stand the competition with their younger brothers. All these factors help to explain why the totalitarians everywhere can use their propaganda of violence to exploit resentment, hatred, radicalism, and political fury. They know that they have only to play on these immature feelings of deprivation and dissatisfaction to bring people under a spell. In my own experience, I have been amazed to see how unrealistic are the bases for political option in general. Only rarely have I found a person who has chosen any particular political party, democratic or totalitarian, through study and comparison of principles. Too often, man's choice of his political affiliations is determined by apathy, by family tradition, by hope for financial gain, or by other irrelevant factors. It is this lack of rational motivation that can make men more susceptible to totalitarian blandishments, even in a democratic community. I remember very clearly, for example, a Dutch physician with whom I went to medical school. He fell in love with the daughter of a communist and eventually married her. At first he was disturbed by the conflict between his principles and his adoration, but gradually his principles gave in and he started to justify the party line. Later on, I met him from time to time. He was an excellent doctor and a jovial fellow, and he took our half-serious quips about his politics in good part. But the moment we began a really serious discussion, he crouched in his official defensive corner and became a different man, sour, mechanical, handing out ready-made arguments. During the war, I met him frequently in the course of our common underground work. He had been completely dazed by Stalin's pact with the Nazis, but the moment Russia was invaded and became an ally, he started his aggressive robotism again. Not only was he a staunch fighter against the Nazis, but he insisted that his was the only way to fight. He lost his life on a dangerous mission for the underground, and I always had the feeling that it was in a way welcome to his latent suicidal feelings. In other Nazi and communists, both, I have seen dramatic examples of how personal resentments outside the suffering of real injustice can lead a man to the side of the rebels. Some of these people were the type who simply submitted passively to a movement stronger than themselves, men and women whose ideology was a reflection of whichever side had caught them first. Others were motivated by the need to vent their own personal anger and resentment in some direction and use political action to satisfy this need. But if we are to come to any real understanding of the internal factors that lead a man to adopt a totalitarian ideology, we must dig a little deeper than this and must give our attention to some basic roots of this problem. The molding nursery. One of the important things we have learned from modern psychology is that the roots of many of our adult attitudes and problems lie far back in the seeming quiet of the nursery and childhood years. The infant's life may appear to be placid and uneventful, but from the moment he is born he hears thousands of rumblings both from inside his own mind and from the world outside. In his mother's womb, he knew neither warmth nor cold. Now his skin transmits these sensations to him. As he lay protected in his mother's body, he did not have to breathe, eat, or excrete. Now he must do all these things by himself. And my phone is ringing, so I'm going to stop it right there. And that was part 1 of chapter 10. We're reading from The Rape of the Mind.